The story goes like this. It's good to have everybody. A young preacher was going to preach at this big church, and he was nervous, and this preacher had been preaching many, many years, and he was very experienced, and so this young preacher got up and he preached his heart out. At the end of the service, the pastor there that had asked him to come just went on back into his office and just kind of disappeared. So after everybody left, this young preacher, he was just dying to know how he done. And so he makes his way back in. He's standing in the doorway of the pastor, and he says, he just sitting there not paying him no attention. And finally, he looks up and he says, "What do you need, young man?" And he says, "Well, how did I do? How did I do today?" He's wanting something. And he said, "You done great." He said, "But just one little problem." He said, "About every 15 or 20 minutes, he said, you made this noise. And he said, I just want to know what that was about." And he said, "I've been listening to you preach." And he said, "And you make that noise." And he said, "When it seems like you make that noise, it seems like you really get anointed." He said, "I thought, well, I'd try it. So I'd get anointed." And he said, "Young man, that wasn't the anointing, it's my false teeth." So sometimes we got to be careful not to pattern ourselves after somebody else, right? Amen? Good to have you today. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to build all my hope on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to build all my hopes on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. Well, I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to build all my hopes on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. Well, you got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to build all your hopes on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. Well, you got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You've got to build all your hopes on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. You may say, "Preacher, you don't know what I'm facing. You just don't really know what I'm going through. You just don't really know what the doctors told me. You just don't really know where my children are at. You just don't know what's going on." And I say, we've got to hold to God's unchanging hand. We got to hold to God's unchanging hand. We've got to build all our hopes on things eternal. We got to hold to God's unchanging hand. Well, you got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. You've got to build all your hopes on things eternal. You got to hold to God's unchanging hand. Well, I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. I'm going to build all my hopes on things eternal. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. How many know what I'm talking about? You say, well, you don't know what it looks like. The Bible says now faith. Hebrews 11:1 says now faith is. Now. We were talking about faith without works is Sunday school. Faith without works is what? It's dead. It's like a glass of tea sitting on the counter and somebody poured you a glass and you could say, I've got a glass of tea and I've got a glass of tea. And if you don't get up and go get the glass of tea and turn it up and drink it, you don't have a glass of tea. You see something, but you don't have it. You've not obtained it. You've got to reach out, act upon your faith. We're going to begin in Hebrews 11:1 with this message, and I pray that it'll touch us, that we take something with us today. We're going from Hebrews to Daniel. Now faith. Now faith. So I got faith. I got all kind of faith. You just need now faith. I got all kind of faith. I believe. Yeah, but you need now faith. Right now, right here, right this moment. So things don't feel good. Don't go by your feelings. Kind of like the preacher, what he heard, he thought that preacher was really getting on fire when his false teeth was making a noise. It's easy to act upon something besides our faith, but it's given to every man or woman, humanity, the measure of faith. We've all got faith. So I don't have no faith. How many cranked your vehicle this morning? Did you have to put a key in it or push a button? Or why did you do that? You believed it was going to crank. He didn't. I know that feeling. But you go out and you put a key in because by faith you're expecting something to happen out of your works. So there have to be some works in order to get us to where we're going. So we act upon faith by our works. We put something in motion. Now, how does this work? Well, a lot of times you got to sow faith. A lot of times you got to sow joy. A lot of times you got to sow peace. A lot of times you got to speak something. It doesn't matter if anybody's around or not. God hears you. And it may be a car that's tore up. It may be maybe you need a roof on your house, or maybe your motor's blown, or maybe your horse is sick, or maybe motorcycle's tore up. And you just speak faith, and it doesn't matter if anybody hears you or not. God hears you. And you just say, I know, God, that you said you'd make a way for me where there seemeth to be no way. And by faith, I believe it's going to happen. And you just go on about your way. You've already spoke something on you. So there's something going to happen out of that because you spoke it and you believed it. So let's move on. I know I've got a ways to go. By it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. By faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony, that he pleased God. Number 6, but without faith it is impossible to please him. Who? God. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. By faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place where he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundation, whose builder and maker is God. Through faith, number 11, also Sarah received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Okay, we're going to go to Daniel 3 from there. Everybody say faith. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. I'm going to try to cover this. We'll break it down. Nebuchadnezzar the image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So he built this image, or this statue, and it was 90 feet tall. This church is 100 feet long. So if you took 10 feet off of this church and stood this church straight up, you can get some kind of an idea of how tall this image of gold was. 90 feet tall and 9 feet deep. That's pretty big. And he built it and he stuck it up and he had it built and put up. And he wanted everybody to come and celebrate and dedicate it. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. I'm reading through this fast. We'll go back to start with one with some notes. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of all the instruments, the music, all the people, the nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear all the music, all the sounds, shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoso fall not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Number one, he made a statue of gold. He had had some visions prior to this, and I believe this was derived, according to some footnotes I read, maybe from the visions he had had. So he built this image of gold. And he invited all the delegates, all the important people, all the people, the great people of the land. He invited them to come and dedicate this statue. That was okay. That was well. But then there was a decree that stated that whoever did not bow down, and the title of this message is Do Not Bow. And the decree was that if you don't bow, we're going to burn you to death in a furnace. That was the decree. So number two, he invited all to come to the dedication. They came and they were all standing there, and they was just in marvel. They were staring at this statue. It's kind of like this art you see around in the county. Have you ever noticed this art? It'll make you stare. I don't know what it is, but it'll make you stare. How many know what I'm talking about? This stuff is made out of iron and all this stuff out. They got them different places in Caldwell County. I'm staring at it too, trying to figure out what it is. I mean, I don't know what it could be. It just looks like somebody was, I don't know, maybe had too much to drink and they got in there with a welder. You know? Anyway, I'm used to art like art, you know. But. So they just stare at this dedication. They stare at this statue. And it doesn't say, but I could just imagine that perhaps it had old King Nebuchadnezzar across the front of this. Oh, King, we've come to bow down to you. We've come to bow to this statue. We've come to give you all the dignity and all the power we can give you. We come to worship you. Because he said if you don't fall down and worship. So we come to fall down and to worship this idol. Worship means the feeling of or expression of reverence and adoration of a deity. To think of something so great that you would worship it. So they came and they come to bow down to worship this statue of gold. Now I'm going to throw a few little things in here. This statue of gold, they didn't have anything coming from this. It wasn't like they was going to give them each one a pick and say, chip you out a piece of this statue and take it with you. This can be yours when you leave. This was a false god, and he made a decree that everybody should bow down together and worship together this false god. Now I'm going to say today that we worship something. We'll worship God or we'll worship something. It's in our nature to follow something. That's the way we're made up. It's not that we're bad, good, or whatever. We're made up to follow the leader, so to speak. And in school, if you didn't follow the leader, you got beat up or you got put down or ridiculed or pushed aside if you didn't follow the leader. When I was in school, you either run with the grain or you wasn't a grain at all. You was put out or cast out. So before I turned 16 years old, a hippie from the 70s, not the 60s, and a drug addict and a drunk and an alcoholic and all the things that my family were, I were. And by the time I was almost 16 years old, I found the Lord in a mobile home over here in Rufford College. And I was so radical about God that I had a blue jean jacket, and I wrote across the back of my jacket, I saved and filled with the Holy Ghost and fire, because that's what come out of the book of Acts. And so people automatically turned on me, and they started saying that I was a narc, and I was going to turn them in for their drugs, and, because I wasn't with them, I was automatically against them. And I wasn't following the leader anymore. And that was just the beginnings of things that God did for me, because he got me, thank God, at an early age. I was living an adult life at 12, 13 years old, because that's the way I was come up. I said, it wasn't because I wanted to. It's the way I come up. I was on the streets at 13, 14 years old. But that's the way God brought me, because he taught me. Somebody say he brought me and he taught me. The things you go through, there's a teaching in it. It's not, you don't just go through things. Somebody said, I've had a hard life all my life. It's because God brought you and he taught you. There's teaching in the things we go through with. You may have had people turn against you when you was just a child, and they treated you bad, misused you, did everything they could to destroy you, but they taught you something. As God brought you, they taught you. And it's a learning experience for us to use in our life. So here they're worshiping this image. They're all standing staring at this statue. And they say, when you hear the music, you must bow down and worship the image. There always seems like there's a key point in our life that's a turning point. That don't mean that we're bad or wrong, or that don't mean we cast out. That means that God, a lot of times, will turn us to go another direction. It's not because we've been bad or because that God's being mean to us. It's because God won't keep us just going just mediocre all of our life. He'll turn us, praise God, because He either wants to bless us or He wants us to bless somebody else. So there's a turning point in all of our lives. And so there was something happening. The music began to play. Now all this led up to the music. When you hear the music start to play. So all of a sudden the music starts playing. And everybody hits their knees and they bow down to this 90-foot statue of gold. And I'm thinking, I don't think there was anything happened staring at that statue of gold. Some of them probably said, I wish I had a pick with me and I could get some of this, maybe take some home. But I don't think anything was going on. They wasn't gaining any power. They were just doing what they were commanded to do because they were afraid they was going to die if they didn't obey the rule. And so everybody was obeying the rule except something happens. Certain tattletales came and started accusing the Jews. Some tattletales came along and said, hey, king, there's some boys over there that's not bowing down. They're not doing what you put into rule that everybody's got to do. They didn't come, and they didn't come to bow down. When the music started playing, they didn't get into the motion of the worship of this idol God. Now listen, it would be much easier to go with the flow, wouldn't it? It's much easier to do what everybody else does than to be ridiculed. It's much easier to go with what everybody else is going than to be told, you're out. You're wrong. You don't fit in. I've never fit in. I haven't fit in since I was born. That's the truth. I've never fit in anything except the hand of God. I mean, I didn't fit in school. I didn't fit in my neighborhood. I didn't fit in anything. I didn't fit in as a drug addict. I never fit in as nothing until I met Jesus. And I fit into the family of God to go to heaven for eternity. I used to wonder, why couldn't I fit in school? Everybody else was wearing blue jeans. I was wearing polyester pants. My mom and dad couldn't afford blue jeans. Me back when I was a child, and they bought me polyester pants. And here I was, the only boy in school with polyester pants on. That was terrible. I didn't fit in. So you're different, preacher. You better believe I'm different. God made me different. When I was a child, He made me different. God can't help it, as a friend of mine used to say. So these tattletales come and they say, oh, king, we got 3 over yonder that's not going by the rules. Don't you love a tattletale? You like to choke them, but you know what I'm talking. Somebody always want to, you know what I saw? I saw a black car at Ingles and that preacher was talking to her. Maybe if you drove a little closer, you'd see it's my wife's car. But you see, we deal with stuff like this. This is normal reality. Well, I saw Sister Diane come out of the bar the other night. You sure it's Diane? Well, she's short and she had kind of short hair. Yeah, it's Diane. But they couldn't tell me what color my shirt was. But you see, that's reality. It doesn't matter what people think about us. It doesn't matter what people say about us. But here these tattletales come. You got 3 Jews over yonder, and they're not going with the rules. There got to be some rule breakers in here. Is there ever been rule breakers in here in school? Got to be somebody. I was one. Did you break rules? Did you break rules? My teacher would, I'd get to talking to this girl, and the teacher moved me on the other side of the class. She'd turn her head, I'd be back over there. She'd move me back over. Turn her head, I'd go back over there. So she said, you're going to write me 100 times I must not talk in school. I wrote 100 times I must talk in school. She said, you're going to write 500 times because I didn't quit. I must not talk in class. I wrote 500 times I must not talk in class. Well, my hand was getting sore. Another friend of mine was the same way. Me and him was writing. We was writing. And she said, I'm going to make you write 1,000 times. She said, you're not going to talk in my class. I want you to write 1,000 times. I must not talk in class. Boy, we got to 1,000. This friend of mine called me. He said, we got to do something. He said, we either got to quit talking or we got to find a better method. I said, I got it. Carbon paper. Here we went. We'd carbon paper. Everything we done with carbon. So she said, she got up to 5,000, 10,000 times. We carbon papered it, baby. We'd carry it in there and hand it to her. She'd look at it and laugh. She said, you got me. I said, I'm doing what you said. You said to write it. I wrote it. Here it is. How many went by the rules? That might be where you're at because you didn't go by the rules. I mean, the rules didn't make no sense, did they? So these tattletales, hey, king, you got to do something. They reminded the king of his law, and they pointed out the three men that didn't know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king sent for these three men, and he told them of their outcome if they didn't bow. Number 11 is the turning point. Here comes the turning point. They said, we don't know if God would deliver us or not. We don't know what God's mind is on this matter. But one thing we do know, we are not going to bow. But you got to look at the consequences, man. You got to look at the consequences. If you don't bow, you're going to die, burned alive in a furnace. King was mad. He said, keepers of the furnace, I want this furnace heated up 7 times hotter. I'm going to make sure I burn these 3 dudes alive. I'm going to make sure I take care of them, and nobody else will never come before me again and break my rules. The king told the furnace keepers to heat the furnace 7 times hotter and throw these men into the fire. Number 14. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto the men, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do you not serve my God, nor the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you be ready at one time, we're going to give you one more chance. If you be ready when the music starts, you fall down and worship the image which I have made well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Number 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his vision was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said to his counselor, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. You know, serving God is kind of like, it's not going to hurt you, it's going to help you, isn't it? It's not going to hurt us. You know, we get around the presence of God, it breaks the bands. You know, when they went into the fire, it burnt the bands off of them. It didn't burn them, it burnt the bands. They wouldn't even smell like smoke when they come out. You know, this morning, we probably all face challenges where we're asked to bow. It might be taking care of a loved one. You know, a lot of times people will see you as a worker, and they'll put a saddle on you, and they will ride you to death. But they don't have to. God give us a mind and a mouth to speak, to say yes, and to say no. We took care of our mother and our stepfather, I guess 7 years, probably 7, 8 years when they started going down, declining with dementia and different things. And I don't regret a day of it. I don't regret 1 minute of it. It's the hardest thing I ever dealt with in my life was dementia. You can't tell a dementia patient no. You cannot do that. You have to agree with them. I don't mean you let them have their way, but you have to agree with them. They won't accept no. They'll fight you over you telling them they can't do something. And I don't regret a minute of it. But sometimes you got to say no. Sometimes you have to be strong. Not mean, strong. There's a difference. There's a difference in being strong and being mean. I've had to cut friends off over the years. Because after a while, God said, it's time, let go. And I believe in being a friend of the sinner because Jesus was a friend of the sinner. And my point of view on reaching somebody is if you don't have something to do with somebody that's lost, you're not going to reach them. You can tell somebody all the time you're going to pray for them to get saved, but if you never put no works with it and become friends, check on them, speak to them, call them, hang out with them. So, oh, we're not supposed to do it. The Bible said, come out from among the world and be ye separated people. You're to have enough God to be able to hang around people and not act like them if they're not doing right. You would think right in your eyes. So they said, we're not going to bow. You know what's going to get you? That's going to get you. You're going to burn alive. I could just see them converging with each other. Who cares? Who cares? The God that I know said he would take care of me. The God that I know said he would make a way where there seemeth to be no way. The God that I know said everything's going to be all right. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the situation. You don't know God. Our God is able. Able, he's able. God is able. And he's willing. So they were between a rock and a hard place. They were there. You may have just come out of something and been there. You may be fixing to go into that. He said, don't put no fear on me. We all face things sometimes that we can't handle. We have to have the master on board to help us. That's why he's God and we're his children. We have to have a master on board. We have to have help through this life. They were between a rock and a hard place. You think God would put you in that situation? Yep. Years ago, I've trucked most of my life. Years ago, I was trucking this place, and this guy came to work there. And this guy here was, he couldn't, I don't think he could have made an enemy. He was the nicest, neatest guy. We become friends. We were running trips together, him and he'd be in a truck with a load, and I'd have a truck and a load going over to Andrews, North Carolina. We would leave and go over there and come back the same day. We would do that every day, making trips over and taking stuff. We become good friends. I didn't know one thing about him, nothing. I didn't have to know anything about him to become friends with him. God put me there to be a friend to him. He began to tell me about his girlfriend. I felt like I knew more about her before I ever met her, because he would tell me little things she'd do, little things she'd say. He never really said a lot of bad things about her. But I felt like I was learning who she was through him. Never really knew much about him all this time. This went on for about 3 or 4 months. One day we're going up through the gorge over there and toward Andrews. And he says, "Where you go to church at?" I said, "What?" He said, "Your church going, man." He said, "Where do you go to church at?" I said, "How'd you know that?" He says, "I know. There's something different about you." I thought, thank God. Thank God there's something. I don't know what it was. Thank God he saw something. I mean, know what I'm talking about. We don't feel churchy, do we? Come on, folks. We don't feel churchy, do we? We live in this life. We go through, so we don't feel, I'm churchy and everybody's going to bow down and say, I don't feel like that. We're not like that, folks. We're just normal people on our way to heaven. Amen. Saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And I told him where I went to church at. He said, "Well, I'm coming Sunday." I said, "What?" Me and my girlfriend be there Sunday. I said, "Okay." He came to church Sunday. He came to church the next Sunday. He came to church for several months. Found out he could cook anything in the world. He'd come over our house, cook. I mean, he could cook. I like good food. He would cook meals after meals after meals. And he told me he was an alcoholic. I said, "I've been around alcoholics all my life. I was an alcoholic." I said, "God saved me." He said, "I know that saving stuff." He said, "My dad's a Baptist preacher," and he said, "I know the Bible like the back of your hand." And he did, and he quoted it to me. And he began to open up to me and tell me things that he did. He began to talk to me and tell me things about his life. He's a male stripper. I said, "You was friends with him?" I never blinked an eye. I'll tell you why, because God put me there. If I would have went there on my own, I would have run when he said that. But God put him in my life for a season. And he said, "I'm a male stripper," and he said, "My my wife's a stripper." And some things he told me and some things he told other people, and they come back and told me. And he would call me, and I'd go to bed, and I wouldn't sleep maybe 30 minutes an hour, and he would call me in the middle of the night, and he'd be just drunk as a skunk. And he wanted to talk Bible. And I'd listen to him. He knew the Bible. I'm telling you what, it's like he wrote it. He knew it. And he'd ask me questions, and I'd answer him the best I could answer him. And this went on for several months. You say, "God won't do nothing like that." You better be surprised what God will do. He'll put people in your life to move you. He'll put people in your life to cause you to do something, to be a witness. to be a light, to help, and sometimes to say no. And you'll know when to say no. And this went on for months. I never slept much. Every night about he'd call me drunk. Next day he was sobered up enough to come to work. Down the road we go. Found out through some other people he was bisexual. His wife was bisexual. Just a lot of things there that I thought, I don't want to be here. Have you ever been somewhere where you didn't want to be? And God didn't give you the go-ahead to stop? You say, why do you do that? Because God's got enough sense. He's big enough and smart enough to say, stop. Go. No, this is over. And I visited this guy for months. He asked me to come over one night and hang out. He'd get the guitar out and he'd pick and sing and drink liquor. What'd you do? I sat there and as a friend, I sat there. I didn't condemn him. I sat there and listened to him. Oh, I could have pulled a lot of things out and I could have thrown a lot of knives at him and said, it's wrong for you to do this, it's wrong for you to do it, it's wrong for you to do it. He knew what was right and wrong. He knew the Bible. Went over at one particular night, he asked him to come over and he got the guitar out and his wife was gone somewhere. And I said, why are you telling all this? Because I'm telling you, God will put you in places you don't want to go. And then when he says that's it, that's it. And went over this one particular night and his wife was gone to town and she come back, she had another woman there with her. My wife knows all about this. I don't keep enough from my wife. And he says, you know a lot about me. And I said, yeah. And he says, I'm your friend. He says, and anything I have, you can have. He said, do you want my wife? He said, you can have her, take her, do what you want to with her. I said, no. I said, I've got a wife. I said, I don't do that. I said, I don't have a desire to do that. Well, I just wanted you to know we're friends, blah, 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 And I stayed a little bit longer and I left. Well, he called me about a week later and he was sitting with a shotgun between his legs up under his chin. And he said, this is the last time I'm going to talk to you. He said, I'm going to pull this trigger and I'm going to blow my head off. I said, you don't want to do that. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I said, no, you don't want to do that. And I talked to him about, I guess, 30, 45 minutes. He got off the phone. Next day he's at work. God spoke to me and he said, your time's up. He said, you're released. I thought, God, thank you, God. Thank you, God. You say, well, you just want something to drink, but then, well, no, it didn't bother me to sit around somebody drinking liquor because God had set me free from it. I didn't have a taste for it. I didn't have a desire. It took a long time for God to get that out of me, but I didn't have it. Thank God. Not that I'm inhuman, but I just didn't have it anymore. God took it out of me. It took me a long time. But I thought, thank God. And he called me. And he started in. I'm going to kill myself. This and this and this and this and this. He started talking about the Bible. God done told me, he said, this is it. He said, you're done. He would quote scriptures to me, and I said, don't call me anymore and talk about the Bible unless you're willing to do something about it. So that was mean. That's the only way I know to do. God said that was enough. That was it. I said, don't call me no more. I don't want to hear it. I said, I know what the Bible says, and I don't want to hear it. You call me and tell me that this, and everything's good. I said, don't call me no more. I said, and we're not going to talk about the Bible no more. I said, you call me and we'll talk, but we're not talking about the Bible no more. And he didn't call me no more. And about a week later, he come in drunk and they fired him. Never seen him anymore. Never, ever saw him again. About a year later, somebody called me and said his wife had died from a deadly disease that was going through the land. And then I heard a few years ago he was working, had a good job at a place in this county, and I thought, that's wonderful. Now, I don't know if what I did done anything or not. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Maybe God used me there. I obeyed God, and I done what God said. I let my light shine. He said, well, I won't never do that. Your light ain't no good in a world that's lit up. Your light's good in a darkness world. That's where your light's good at. I'm not telling you to go hunt the darkest room you can find to be a light to, but I tell you your light's no good when there's lights around. We can all be happy and say we're going to heaven in a light, can't we? When you get out there in 101 and you meet somebody that says, I don't believe nothing you say, you're fake and you're phony and I don't believe a thing you say, and that Bible there's a bunch of junk, and they start putting it on you, then you find out you got something, you can let your light shine then. You don't have to beat them down and say, I'm going to tell you I'm right. No, all you got to do is smile at them and let the love of Jesus shine. That's all it takes. Doesn't take a whole lot of I'm right. We don't have to prove we're right about anything, do we? We don't have to do that. And I wouldn't take anything for those 6-7 months. Did I like it? No, but I knew God put me where He wanted me. And I knew when He spoke to me and He said, that's it. Sometimes people go to prison and they're there for a year or so. They don't even know why they had to go. They was falsely accused. And when they come out, they say, I didn't deserve to go to prison, but I know why I went. I went there because the person that I was in the jail with, or the person I was next to, I witnessed to him that got saved. There's a preacher down there in Hickory. He's gone. He died now, but he had cancer years ago. And a friend of mine went to his church, and he was going through treatments and different things, and he was just deathly sick, and they sent him to Winston-Salem. He was laying there in the bed, and he was so sick. And a man come in to clean the room. He looked over at the preacher and he said, what are you in here for? He said, they say I'm dying. He said, oh, I hate to hear that. He said, well, what you got? What's going on? He said, I got cancer. And they say I'm leaving. He said, they say I'm leaving. I don't have long to go. He said, what are you doing down here? He said, they brought me down to give me some treatments. 2 or 3 days, the man would come in there, clean his room. After about the 3rd day, the man come in there, and he sat down there at the edge of the bed, and the preacher led him to Christ. He just told him about his Father. He just told him about God. And the preacher led him to Christ. He come back to his church, and he lived maybe 6 months longer. He said, I am so glad I got to go to Winston-Salem and get those treatments, because I was able to save somebody from hell. I was able to tell them about Jesus. That's what it's all about. Amen. That's what it's all about. It's not about the greatness of anything that we could possibly do. It's the greatness of Him. He's the one that's great. So this morning, don't bow. This morning you have an opportunity to say no. You say, no, I'm not bowing. If things get tight, I know it. Sometimes things really tighten up. Sometimes God really puts us on the spot, don't He? Sometimes people you thought was friends will turn on you so fast, make your head spin. We were talking the other day about party lines. I hope I got that started. Anybody remember party lines? We got single lines now. We had party lines. What does that mean? We had 3 or 4 people on the phone at the same time in our neighborhood. If you want to know anything that's going on in the neighborhood, just pick up the phone and listen. It was kind of funny in a way, except when they was talking about you. Did you? Yeah. Do you operate them party lines? My goodness. That was so funny because there'd be 3 or 4 people on the line at the same time. And you knew who they was, because most of the lines was close. And I remember a woman lived beside of us. There's a woman lived across the street. I knew her. You could hear all about what they thought about you. They just put it out there, talking to each other. It was so funny. I'm glad we don't have party lines no more, though. I ain't got phone up. And you wanted to use the phone every time you pick it up. Somebody's on it, wasn't it? Well, those cracks and pops is us instead of that popcorn. It's us. How many loves the Lord this morning? Give him a cheer this morning.